I'm Beth Piatote. I'm the director of the Arts Research Center. Welcome, everyone. Please get some food. This is the inaugural Loft Hour of our third year of the Loft Hour. This is one of the most, yes, this is the right reaction. We love the Loft Hour because it gives us a great opportunity to actually talk to our colleagues, find out what they're doing, enjoy food and drink and conversation. So while we're celebrating our great program today and the launch of our third year of the Loft Hour, we're also celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Arts Research Center. And so what we are doing for our 25th is celebrating the power of art to sustain so many aspects of our worlds. So to sustain our joy, our ability to create, our creativity, our critique, our voice. And in that spirit, we have some bookmarks that everyone can make on their way in or out with stamps. Can't steal my fill in the blank. And you can fill in the blank with as many things as you wish. Also, in the spirit of joy and celebration and making one's mark in the world, we made bingo cards for our 25th anniversary. 25 events for 25 years. So here's your bingo card. Here it goes on the back. You can also stamp these if you want. So that's all on the table outside. Also on the table, more swag. Pins. Get the full set. Pens. And for two lucky winners today, you will get our screen printed celebration t-shirt celebrating lines from Layli Long Soldier's poem. These were handmade just right in this space. Layli Long Soldier will be giving 2 programs in the spring. We're looking forward to that in April. Also, our big event featuring our dean, Sarah Geyer, who has generously sponsored this series from the beginning and helped us envision it. Dean Geyer will be in conversation with Isabel Allende. So get your tickets early. That's November 5th. Okay, so grab the Loft Hour programs, the full poster, or these clever cards, and encourage your friends to come. Okay, with that, I just want to get off the stage so we can hear our guests today. I'm going to introduce Iggy Cortez, our moderator for our program today, featuring Karina Gutiérrez and Mu-Xuan Lin. Iggy Cortez is a scholar of world cinema and contemporary art whose research and teaching are broadly concerned with diasporic thought and visual culture, epistemologies of the global, the visual and sensory dimensions of digital media, minoritarian aesthetics, cinema's relation to other media, and questions of sexuality, cinematic performance, and embodiment. He's currently at work on a book project entitled Nights on Earth: World Cinema and the Nocturnal Sensorium, that explores nighttime as a conceptual and sensory threshold across recent world cinema. Through a global range of nocturnal films, this project looks at the relationship between technologically mediated perception and the affective and sensory dimensions of the historical present. His writing has appeared or is forthcoming in the Journal of Cinema and Media Studies, Camera Obscura, Film Quarterly, ASAP, CAA Reviews, Discourse, and several edited volumes. With Ian Fleischman, he is also the co-editor of Performative Opacity and the work of Isabel Huppert. I'd also like to note that in addition to all of those amazing things, Iggy's also organizing a film series and speaker series, and the first event is tonight, Seeing Bahia, the City of Women. And that's at 5 p.m. At 142 Dwinell Hall. So welcome, Iggy. Iggy presented his work here at the Loft Hour last year, I think, 2 years ago. Oh, time goes so quickly. Anyway, welcome back. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers today. Our first speaker is Karina Gutiérrez, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies. Gutierrez's work focuses on the intersection of politics and performance, with a concentration on how digital interventions, institutionalization efforts, and historical narrative have affected the development and sustainability of social and politically engaged performance companies and collectives throughout the Americas. Her reviews have appeared in journals such as Theater Survey and the Journal of American Drama, with forthcoming publications in Modern Drama, Theater Annual, and the Latino Literature Encyclopedia for Students. Prior to coming to UC Berkeley, Gutierrez was an assistant professor at Santa Clara University. She earned her doctorate in theater and performance studies with a minor in feminist, gender, and sexuality studies from Stanford University in 2020, upon which she was awarded the Carl Weber Prize for Integration of Creative Practice and Scholarly Research. Outside of academia, Gutierrez works as an actor, director, and dramaturgist throughout the Bay Area, in addition to co-founding BALTAN, or the Bay Area Latino Theater Alliance Network. Reviews of her directed productions have appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle, Broadway World, and Berkeleyside. And our next speaker is Mu-Xuan Lin, who is a composer, curator, writer, and researcher, who defines her life as a quest for an artistic autonomy poetically engendered by both its will and its vulnerability to one's corporeal experience and to the world one lives in. Having had extensive training in the visual arts and creative writing and frequent exposure to theater, dance, and literature from an early age, and profound influences from cinema, Mu-Xuan is interested in the montage and the mise-en-scène of contemporary individuals' fragmented yet interlaced truths, or the confusion of time and space and identities that are both construed and broken. She creates with an emphasis on the kinetic formulation and transfer between various expressive art forms or matters with the sonic and temporal dimensions. Described by the LA Times as fascinating and by the SFR2 culture as sonically sensuous, her music has been heard worldwide and on a sound and on Einklang Records. She is a guest composer and faculty at the Novalis Music Art Festival and the New Music on the Bluff Festival. She's also the winner of the Pronto Work No. 3 Award and the Ensemble Adopters Commission Project, Adoptions 217, an artist in residence at the Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris, an awardee of multiple international institutions. So please join me in welcoming Karina, first speaker.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. I want to give a welcome and to all of you for joining us today, and a thank you to Beth for inviting me to participate, as well as a thank you to my incredible colleagues here in the Department of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies. In this presentation, I'd like to familiarize you with some of my research, my ongoing research and practice in theater, my home place, and what I see as a powerful space for social change, and also for mending, healing, and restoring the continuities of culture that have been torn through coloniality and settler propriety. I've taken some of this talk from a manuscript that is currently in progress entitled From Collectivism to Professionalism, The Struggle for the Survival of Social Protest Theater in Post-1980 Latinx America, which examines the changes in what we consider to be movement theater, or theater of social protest. What I attempt to do in this manuscript is to update and rework these ideas of the human body as the sole animating force of change. Of course, our bodies are critical to the making of space to begin with, but as an elder millennial, I felt that there was something missing that people, especially younger generations that I work with at the undergraduate level, were gravitating towards. A fluidity, a form that moves away from the primacy of the body into the production of new spaces or spatiality. So this talk starts with a chapter that I call Bodies on the Line. The political performance of las tesis and hijas de la violencia. We're going to be concentrating on las tesis for the purpose of this talk today. which investigates how audience engagement and intervention shifted in the period of the new millennium from traditional live forms to social media platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and specifically considers how space, both physical and digital, are energized, to use Gay Macaulay's term, as sites of performance and resistance. So the chapter argues that activist performance groups, Hijas de Violencia and Las Tesis, energize their resistance tactics through their case leads to a temporary inversion of patriarchal norms, in part through digital media, by re-envisioning and thereby reclaiming physical terrain. Similarly, their digital interventions, largely through their online presence, temporarily disrupt and alter the digital terrain, monumentalizing a non-physical performance space and/or site of dissent. Such feminist street theater functions on three distinct yet interconnected planes: the physical live act, the recorded or mediated performance observed by viewers around the globe who become participants via the discursive engagement, and the post-live performance, that is, the circulated performance following a significant time lapse. I work with an idea of the cyber archive, referring to a digitized repository of documents, images, and videos whose accessibility is dependent upon audience engagement. The digital influence on performance changes it from a live medium viewed by a single audience at a specific time and place into an interactive medium that reaches people wherever they are and however they want to use their devices to participate. The cyber archive allows performance and protest to exist on virtual platforms, redefining the avenues through which information travels globally. I also apply the digital to my directing practice. If we consider our engagement as an extension of performance, and that engagement can in fact change the efficacy of the performance itself, then we as active audiences act as directors, and sometimes even dramaturgs, defining and providing unifying understandings of the performances, the space where they take place, and the players themselves. So how does this all translate to the work of Las Tesis? Well, Las Tesis is a feminist collective out of Valparaiso, Chile, formed in 2018, which emerged from a nationwide protest under government-sanctioned economic inequity. Following a 3% hike in 2019, it was said to spark Chile's worst unrest in decades. Citizens called for a new national constitution and an end to systemic forms of social and economic oppression. And as a result, protesters experienced human rights and security violations at the hand of police. Women's reports of sexual assault, rape, and torture were met with silence, and Las Tesis, whose name translates loosely to the thesis, refers to the collective's voracity for disseminating feminist theory through a series of manifestos and performances. Las Tesis responded directly to these state abuses, linking sexual violence and institutional power structures, especially the police and the judiciary. In 2020, a Facebook post clarifies their intentions as a feminist collective. As they state various unsubstantiated messages and comments, we have decided to clarify that we do not belong to, sympathize with, or care with any political party. We will continue resisting with our bodies, the streets, theaters, concerts, parties, fairs, and wherever we can show our work, and continue our goal of spreading feminist ideas until the patriarchy burns and falls. You know, that old chestnut. Their in-your-face, spontaneous, yet choreographed and calendared movement sequences, replete with chants, are a catalyst for others to infiltrate restricted, male-dominated public and private spaces. And on November 25th, 2019, in commemoration of El Día Internacional de la Eliminación de la Violencia hacia la Mujer, Chilean feminist collective burst onto the international stage with the debut of their now infamous feminist battle cry, Un violador en tu camino, or a rapist in your path. Backed by crowds of thousands, including Lea Cáceres, Paula Cometa, Daphne Valdés, Sibilia Sotomayor, they led a social protest performance in Santiago, Chile, and the performance protests the state's complicity in gendered street rape, harassment, rape, femicide, and forced disappearances. Las Tesis enlists a more collaborative technique, calling upon women to participate in performances alongside them. Demonstrations are thoughtfully organized with details uploaded on their social media platforms. Participants are asked to wear a combination of bright colors and basic black, a color-coded dichotomy that simultaneously calls attention to the assembled groups of women as well as conveys collective mourning. Bullhorns and cell phones are their weapons of choice, objects that both project their physical voices and document and disseminate their message over digital platforms. Performances are recorded from the perspective of non-participating spectators or from within the performing crowd before they are uploaded onto their social media platforms for dispersal. On a platform where information is easily codified for and consumed by a transcultural audience, Las Tesis world-making creates a lasting archive, chronicling transgression after transgression. Thus, Las Tesis performance requires action in the form of interaction with both the performance on the ground and contributing materials that follow. The efficacy of audience participation is a co-performance of sorts, where the archive is regarded as a collection of enduring materials. However, the cyber archive is subject to more timely revisions, multidimensional meanings, layered understandings, and modes of surveillance. Digital coverage also acts as the antithesis to physical archives that prefer elite audiences to common people. Additionally, the cyber archive is not controlled by a select few, but many, making the digital space a compelling platform and tool of resistance. In other words, I see these digital forms as extensions of the meaning-making on stage, as repeatable, mimeable, and also place-making extensions that have all kinds of potential to integrate within a script or our own performance-making process. And I'd like to play a brief snippet of what I mean, of what this looks like in performance, so you see what I'm talking about. I hope it's not too loud. Okay, we'll stop that here for now. Un violador en tu camino criticizes state-sanctioned human rights violations against women and women-identified bodies by government institutions such as the police, the judiciary, and elected officials. Verses explicitly implicate these aforementioned institutions, while the participants' accompanying gestures portray how violence is repeatedly enacted on the body. Let's go this way, yes. Their first verse asserts the judicial system's complicity, and I won't go through, a line-by-line reading, but I did want to provide Chicano English translation, if you will, of the lyrics themselves. The first verse proclaims that patriarchal behaviors ingrained in the very institutions meant to mandate justice exist. Las Tesis further draws a direct line from harassment to femicide. The pre-chorus calls out the crime as their choreography portrays state-sanctioned violence against feminine identifying bodies. Las Tesis states that police often resort to humiliating tactics to subordinate women, and choreography reflects some of the litany of charges these institutions face. Participants further indict the police as they squat with their hands behind their heads after each line of the pre-chorus. The gesture alludes to how police force women to strip nude and take this pose as police conduct a cavity search after arrests. These verses are accompanied by a more joyous rendition of their side-to-side movements, validating and disabusing victims from the state-tired's excuses for gender-based violence. This performance becomes a collective public testimony. Additionally, the viral dissemination of these performances across multiple social media platforms invited users to engage with the material as part of their own cyber archives. Here, the cyber archive allows spectators to engage with these videos and prolong the lifespan of the performance on digital platforms by commenting and reposting the performance. Digital engagement increases the number of tangible materials in the archive and advances the performance outside of the physical limits of space. I should also add that in their social media platforms, they provide a how-to kit. They provide the music, they provide the lyrics, and they ask you to make it your own for your specific needs. So in addition to social commentary, Las Tesis' citationality is found in the repetition of their performances around the globe. Since November 2019, spectators have expanded Las Tesis' cyber archive by reprising Un Violador en tu Camino in every continent, with performances taking place in Brazil, Mexico, London, India, Switzerland, just to name a few. According to the Associated Press, on January 9th, 2020, there was a performance held in Manhattan during the trial of Harvey Weinstein. And it caused, quote, such a commotion that it was a commotion so loud that it could be heard on the 15th floor courtroom. Harvey Weinstein's lawyers asked that they end for the evening, as this was a major distraction, a request that was denied. As always, I am running low on time, so I will stop there, but I thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to engaging in conversation.
So what you just watched is a 4-minute excerpt of my audiovisual piece, Concupiscencia Femina, written in this year for trumpet, trombone, bass, clarinet, baritone singer, electronics, and video. The 4 instruments and voice that made up the ensemble are ones that were stereotypically associated with a hunky type of masculinity. The brass, the big bands, the military, the gusty and brash tones, and the macho operatic roles. And this piece does exactly that. It takes those materials, except in an oddly introspective, self-aware, and fragmented manner. The optic is another oxymoron. The video projected behind the ensemble shows footages of female nude, figure or figuring, that would stereotypically be considered erotic, almost soft pornish. The ensemble is all men. The baritone vocalist, whose voice was captured and re-enunciated in electronics, is performing squats, sit-ups, and push-ups on stage while vocalizing, with his vocalization contingent to the breathing patterns required for the workout or to the obstructed cavity and curl of tongue due to a candy he places in his mouth. This score is in some parts fully notated and in others aleatoric. The effort of mediating between the score and the performance, and in the case of the vocalist, the physical effort, were intended to result in a crude, sloppy, high testosterone musical montage that weirdly complements or even emboldens the expressivity and agency of the slowly pulsing, quietly breathing, yet seemingly objectified female sexuality in the video. Concupiscencia Femina is one of my recent works that materializes, questions, ruminates, or contests the sensibilities surrounding female sexuality. While there are a visual component and a vocal part to this piece, neither the video nor the music provides any singular narrative that are clearly explanatory of the extra-musical topic. Instead, both the electronics and the acoustic instruments present materials in the form of sound objects, les objets sonores, that are symbolic in their historical, aesthetical, or social implications. And these sound objects, both discernible as signifiers and meanwhile opaque and indifferent as artifacts, through fragmentation, repetition, and juxtaposition with the visual images, proceed to induce an immersion gestalt. The sound and the images are fused together also in the way that the production of certain sounds, namely those directly projected out from a human body, are rendered as optical presentation through the visual signifiers of the singer's abnormally normal exercise movements on stage. It is in this way that the work opens up for the audience the possibility of a multi-layer hermeneutic reading enmeshed in a specific web of artifacts, characteristics of the relational complexity in the perception of female sexuality. Throughout my creative practice, spanning more than 2 decades, despite the evolving and expanding technical development and stylistic changes from piece to piece, the intrinsic and ongoing ethos in my creativity has always been one thing: to manifest the lived reality of will and vulnerability. In my work, I seek to activate 2 normalizing modes. And there's a graph here of all the details, but I won't verbalize those details as we have time constraint. So the 2 conceptual kernels that I try to evoke in my work is, number 1, the erotic. And the term erotic here is taken from Outlaw's the uses of erotic. Okay, so that translates in art and especially in music to agency and desire, or subjectivity, or the sense of self. Number 2, the melancholy, which translates to imposed condition, namely objectivity or objectification, the sense of self as perceived by others or within a circumstances. I'll keep this graph open throughout the next section. Okay. So as such, for my composition methods, I invest in the ideas of artifacts and cinematic spaces, both of which activate the possibility for the erotic and the melancholy. Artifacts are opaque, concrete, symbolic, with meanings at least partially contingent to the audience who perceive them. It's often directly linked to the vernacular and the cultural, and in a horizontal world today, is often commodified. However, anything can be turned into an artifact as long as the given form or the lack whereof is stripped away or altered. Repetition and interpolation are often used as techniques to achieve such alteration in my work. In addition, cultural artifacts, especially consumeristic ones, can pose as a dominant agent due to their ability to infiltrate a public conscious as universal and personal. Such legitimacy in expression, when using immersive electroacoustic performance space, for example, makes it the perfect device to impose formal and temporological ruptures that can instantly alter the audience's cognitive mode. As for the cinematic spaces, what cinematic art uniquely possesses are the montage, the simultaneity of visual information in a locality, along with the temporal unfolding, and the possibility of drawing different spatial distances. The idea of distance is of particular interest to me. Depending on the distance of a shot, the audience can view the subject on the screen in various surrogated relationship with it. I especially find resonance within films post-1965 or 1968 in the paradigm shift that might be called the advent of time image by Deleuze, or the magical realism and postmodern works in the 90s and the 2000s. The former, for the block form montage that present distances and time as a priori, the latter for the oniric logic and the artifacts brought to their grotesque symbolic extremes. In my acoustical or multimedia works, I transfer such apparatus into compositional techniques. For example, as regards to the ideas of distances, I apply audio samples of vastly different qualities. The quality and the condition in which the sound sources were made or played back determine the viscosity of the space in relation to the human body, the light and temperature within a certain time and duration, and a person's proclivity for certain psychic self-positioning within the respective environment. This can be in the form of a field recording used in electronics, a live radio playback from a Walkman, or in the case of the next piece I'm going to play, extremely poor quality audios playback through 8 Bluetooth speakers as auxiliary instruments. In short, no matter the method, the research focus, the individual idea for each work, what I have been doing and am doing in my art is utilizing my agility of self-positioning or self-extracting and my aptitude for multiple or simultaneous sensorial perceptions, render myself the other, my art, and the audience equally in an experience that demands both critique and emotional vulnerability, without being either naive in absolute indulgence or cynical in a perceptual critical distance. Now, to wrap up my talk, I will be playing a 2-minute excerpt from an ensemble piece from 2022 named A Teenage Fairy They Were, commissioned and premiered by the Ensemble Proton Band in Switzerland. Okay, thank you. That's it. The whole piece is 15 minutes.
So as Mu-Xuan gets sets up or de-sets up, I'm going to start off our conversation, maybe ask just 2 questions just to get the conversation going, since I see that there are many people here and I would love for everybody to have an opportunity to ask a question. There's so many rich points of resonance between your work, and as a means of maybe getting us started, I wanted to ask perhaps about intermediality, right? Which is to say the ways in which you are incorporating so many different kinds of media in your work that in some ways interrogates the boundaries or the limits of what performance can be or what composition can be. Like in this last piece, I loved how you're incorporating the Bluetooth speakers as another kind of like instrument that like the mediation is a part of the composition in many ways. And we were talking about a production you're doing that incorporates gaming, puppets. And so there's something about this sort of intermedial nature of both of your work that also, I think, is about interrogating the boundaries of disciplines, but it also, I think, fits within the kind of political and social work that your work is aiming to do. So if you could start off by talking about any of these specific projects and how intermediality informs your work.
As an opportunity for a shameless plug as to our incredible upcoming season. But I think there is a lot to be said about mediating narrative. I think with the work of Las Tesis and with Hijas de la Violencia, which I didn't really get an opportunity to speak on, it's really about who controls the narrative, and we're living at a time where these spaces, as free as they're supposed to be, are now under quite a bit of scrutiny, and so censorship also controls who has access to that particular algorithm. Right? So that's a complication that we're coming up against. And that controls the narrative, or who has access to said narrative. In other ways in which we're doing it in production, I mean, I'm currently directing a piece that's maybe more along the lines of conventional theater called She Kills Monsters, which actually showcases 3 specific narratives. You have our protagonist's journey through grief, having lost both parents and a sibling, the world of RPG and specifically Dungeons and Dragons, which is an unfinished manuscript, essentially a campaign that is meant to be played. There's a certain level of, I'm talking about interrogation, a certain level of role playing that goes into it. So you know, it's not necessarily a scripted adventure. You have to improvise whilst you're in the game. And then there's, of course, the person who is interpreting said narrative, which is the DM, or also known as the Dungeon Master, which also has to lead a series of players through this narrative. Our theme this year is the unreliable narrator, because you really are trying to find the thread between knowing that there is no specific story, like one story to follow. I think a lot is happening in the work of Hijas de Violencia today, in which that narrative is being commodified in a way that is not its original intention. I see that with the work of El Teatro Campesino, where that narrative is now historicized and it's not spoken in relation to the time in which it was created.
Yeah, for me. Hello? Is it working? Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, so for me, this idea of intermediality and the necessity, I will call it necessity, in fact, in today's creative world, across all medias and genres, is caused by the world and time we live in. And as we know that, you know, we talk about older millennial, I'm also an older millennial, so I have experienced an upbringing, right? An upbringing of both analog and digital, right? So, and especially before, after the second half of the last century, we no longer live in the world where canons or or narratives were contained geographically, and we think, it's somehow the cultural matrix is no longer self-contained and linear. The development of that is no longer linear. So we live in a kind of an excess of stimulation because of the internet age, but also because of this kind of horizontal world that actually the reality for us is almost impossible now for anyone to experience the kind of close canonical heritages. Yes, right? So for me, I saw a tendency, and that's kind of the zeitgeist of all artists nowadays, my generation and younger, that who are doing works that were, inevitably multidisciplinary. Yeah, and so in this way, I feel, for instance, my personal background, but also in my work, I don't really perceive in the process of creation and also in the process of research and talking about it as in some form of singularity, aesthetically speaking. Okay, so for instance, I'm teaching a seminar that's called the multisensorial experiences and how we approach contemporary arts, and that's for composers, for musicians. But actually, we're analyzing, for instance, Pina Bausch's choreography right now. We introduce film works and such. And because in a way, a lot of musicians are creating, having the concept or even the logic from other sensorial forms, right? Like I consider myself composing with choreography in my head, right? And there are also dancers or choreographers or filmmakers or architects that actually create with a synesthetic approach to it. So this kind of intermediality and the engagement and involvement, development of multidisciplinary practices is a necessary and natural, and it addresses the sensorial, perceptual, and epistemological reality in today's world across culture. So I think it has a possibility of, it has a futurity to it that is constructive, but at the same time human, but at the same time it looks at our history in the way that is accepting, but at the same time moving on.
Wonderful. And maybe taking off the when you were talking about teaching, Mu-Xuan, and I was really interested in the fact that both of you are a scholar, researcher, and practitioners. Mu-Xuan, you're also a curator as well. So you're really working in so many different realms. So the next question is about how your practice, your creative practice, informs your research or your curating or your teaching. I'm interested in how you're kind of integrating these different domains, right? Like how are they influencing each other? The kind of scholarship you're producing, Karina, and how is that influencing some of your creative work, your work in dramaturgy, and also your work perhaps in curatorial and other domains?
I think it's an act of art. I mean, I'm currently teaching a dramaturgy course, which I deem an act of sport, because it's not just you in an archive, it's how do you embolden, how do you animate that in real time. So actually, I'll give an example of one of the assignments or one of the units that I teach is how do we embody the archive? Can we embody the archive? So I have students go to the archive, the special collections here, and they are to research a specific item. And then I actually have them write about it, write poetry about it, and then I have them go home and assemble a series of items that are an extension of themselves in a suitcase, as if they are going on a journey. I ask them to then write a letter to anyone who finds said suitcase and gives them specific instructions on how they are to handle this ephemera. So what then follows is a 3-hour kind of meditation on how we handle objects, how we are in relation to our own objects vis-a-vis how others are in relation to other people's objects, and the care that we provide. Then we have a larger discussion on the ethics of how we are vis-a-vis the archive. Why is it that we give a certain level of care to our own items, because we know its narrative and we know its history, and others items in the room because we know our colleagues by extension, but we can't offer that same level of care to something behind plexiglass that is also meant to be engaged with in a way that we are no longer able to. So to me, the politics are truly enacted when we embody what Shri Moraga calls the theory in the flesh. And it's an example of how I teach that in dramaturgy.
I just love what you just said because it's exactly connected to what I believe in as well, and applying my own practice. So this kind of embodied knowledge, that's exactly what I considered important or natural as. Having my research as an extension of my creativity and also vice versa. Yes, so I quoted, I mentioned Outerlord before, this kind of the uses of the erotics, and in my opinion, this is exactly this kind of embodied knowledge that your research or your creative thinking they were in some way connected through the navigation between logic and experiences. Mm-hmm. Yes, so for me, it's not that I have to intentionally incorporate one into the other, but it's more so that naturally from my exploration in the composition method, I would think about philosophical or rhetorical topics and other subject matters, and then that would in some way instigate in me a desire for research, right? And the other way also works. My curatorial practice right now is mostly for performing arts. That also is because originally I was working on individual pieces that were multidisciplinary, and I work with dancers and musicians, and sometimes I perform myself. And so I direct the whole mise en scène, and I also art director in my own pieces. And at one point, it's just naturally evolved to become the direction of the entire music theater of multiple contemporary pieces, yes, in a theatrical format. So for me, these practices are connected in some way. So it all based on the intuition for an embodied knowledge and quest.
Wonderful. And I think we have time for a few questions. We'll take some from the audience.
Hi, thank you, Sri. My name is Sansan. I am in theater, dance, and performance studies, where Karina is housed. I have a question for each of you. For Mu-Xuan, nice to meet you. I owe you an email. I would love to hear more about your relationship to dance and how you use dance in your practice. And then for Karina, so there has been of late a movement here in the Bay Area related to the sort of resistance against Project 2025. Or is it 26? Is it called 2025? Thank you. God, dang. Where some dancers are sending out YouTube tutorials for a flash dance, for a flash mob, so that you can learn them and then show up at the site to protest. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk about the sort of broader applicability of what you were saying, Las Tesis does, and whether there's something different that's happening there in Chile, or whether you sort of see this as part of a kind of larger phenomenon.
Yes, and nice meeting you, finally. So for my own composition that involved dancers, or at least applying concepts or some elements of dance, I personally, I am an amateur dancer. I take dance as a hobby. I used to learn dancing when I was young. But it's mostly that I grew up watching more contemporary dance theater, more so than classical music, actually. And so for me, conceptually speaking, let's say if the piece is without actual dancers, for me, there are a lot of direct correlations between the two. For instance, when I look at, for instance, like Pina Bausch's dance theater, the idea of repetition and how symbols were applied in repetition and transformed to become signs, therefore opened up interpretations. And of course, in my own terminology, that would be artifact making, and through the use of artifact, providing an opening of the perception. So for me, and also that is quite a resonant issue for me, and also the way choreography, how it deals with the group dance and the individuals and the counterpoint on stage. For me, and aesthetic flow that came from patterns, right? That for me have a lot of conceptual affinity to my own practices. But I do, I occasionally work with dancers, and last year I wrote a piece in the multi-movement piece, in a short movement, I actually danced myself on stage. Yeah. So for me, the dancers I work with, sometimes I have them. For instance, I have an experimental miniature piece a few years ago in Switzerland that I had one of the dancers being wearing a white veil and having a rope around her body, and she was led by a singer. So it's a music, a vocal plus movement piece, and then so she's walking behind the singer. Docilely, and also had to repeat vocally what the dancer is doing. And on the way, there was another dancer on the street wearing a headphone, listening to Rick Astley. Yeah, but you don't hear Rick Astley, or the audience don't hear it. But he was listening, and he was dancing very sleazily to the Rick Astley. And when the bright figure dancer passing by in front of him, and he was like, "Hey," and he did not speak, but he was like, doing this very salacious seduction. Yeah, so for example, I have works that were incorporated in the way that is sonically and movement-wise, they create a kind of theatrical situation. But it doesn't have fixed interpretation either. So I have that, but also I have work with dancers where they want to experiment having movement before music. But that was another story that was more challenging, in fact, for the dancers. Yes. So there are many ways, and I'm open to many different methods of collaboration and also incorporation or cross-referencing. So I just gave some of the examples.
So it's really interesting because when I did I worked with an organization called Teatro Yuyachkani out of Lima, Peru, and they don't make the distinction between dance and performance. And I think that's one of the resonances that I'd like to see happening, or something I would like to see happen here in the United States, because I think so often we're siloed between this is a theatrical performance, this is a work of social protest theater, which is somehow viewed as separate from the more traditional forms of performance. It is still enacting a lot of those performatives that we talk about. And then there's dance. And I think that one of the ways in which we can maybe amplify that here in the United States is to take a page from Yuyachkani, or even the early days of like the carpa performances in the 1930s along the borderlines, where they actually used dance as ritual, as a way of bringing people along with them. Now, I often think about what would happen if, in 1964, when El Teatro Campesino was forming, they had access to these digital platforms. It might have been a bit of a game changer, right? But I do think that the first part is to make dance accessible, and it's to change our perception of it being so incredibly siloed, to maybe use it in the same way Yuyachkani does, as an invitation to participate, that it is less of like a formalized dance that is accessible to only a few and something that already lives within the body, and to using some of those same platforms that are being enacted by Las Tesis, Hijas de Violencia, Ni Una Menos in Mexico City, and to amplify it outside of just the regionalism, but making it national. And I think in the case of what's happening with 2025, we should care not just because it's happening here in the United States, but how do we make connection to other global efforts that are similar yet incredibly different.
Thank you so much, incredible panel, for sharing so many brilliant insights with us today, and everyone who's come. One last thing, we do have prize. If you look under your chair, and if there is a Post-it note under your chair, you will win a prize. If you want to run to a chair that has one, yes, there you go. Okay. Yay. Of course, everyone is a winner who came here today because we're all leaving with so many gifts. So thank you again to our panel. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in November. Matthew and Sandra will be here in November. So thank you.